This video is primarily about one aspect of the famous McMartin Preschool case. The case began in 1984 from an accusation of sexual abuse of children perpetrated by the staff at the McMartin Preschool in Manhattan Beach, California. This ended up being the longest and most expensive trial ever. Because there are so many issues and aspects of this famous case, I am going to narrow it down to one issue: the question of, were there tunnels below the school? Here is some background. Some of the children reported that sexual abuse had taken place in tunnels and a secret room that were located underground below the school building. The general consensus is that there were no such tunnels. However, there are some people who still maintain that there is conclusive evidence that there were tunnels and a secret room below the school that had been filled in sometime after the initial indictments were launched against the workers at the preschool. Now let's go over some things about research in general. No matter what topic you research, even topics that don't have a trace of a publicly controversial issue will yield conflicting information. Not just minor discrepancies, but mutually exclusive contradictions in that if one is true, then the other must be false, and vice versa. If you research a topic and you do not come up with such contradictory information, then I would say you haven't researched the topic thoroughly enough. Back to the books, Buster. So how do we determine which information is correct? The hard truth is that sometimes we really can't. And sometimes you will see an author just throw in the towel and say something like, there is conflicting information and we really don't know for sure which is correct. I'll go over some tips that can help determine what information is more likely to be accurate. One is the preponderance of information. If you find 10 sources that say X is true and only 2 sources that say Y is true, X is more likely to be true. Look at the quality of the source. You are more likely to get accurate information from a respected newspaper, magazine, or scientific journal than you would from a tabloid or a TV talk show. Does the source have a decidedly political or religious bias? If so, the information is likely to be skewed. Is it sensationalized? If you read an article that starts out something like, under the moonlit sky, our 2 young explorers quietly crept into the dark forest, armed only with flashlights. They were not prepared for the unforeseen danger that lurked within. Yeah, if it reads like a novel, it probably is one. Are there grammatical errors, spelling mistakes, internal inconsistencies? If the document has not been checked for basic errors, then how likely is it that it has been checked for informational accuracy? Is the document vague and ambiguous? If so, it's worthless. Good information must be very specific and presented in a clear manner. And again, none of these are surefire ways to determine the absolute veracity of information, but guidelines that can help determine what is more likely. So, on to the issue at hand. Were there, or were there not, tunnels below the McMartin School building? The first investigation into the matter was performed by parents of the McMartin School's children in March of 1984. Holes were dug in the vacant lot next to the school. They were looking for the remains of animals that had been reported to be sacrificed and a secret underground room. Days later, a professional archaeological firm that was hired by the district attorney's office conducted an investigation of the site. No tunnels, trapdoors, or animal remains bearing any evidence of ritual sacrifice were discovered. On April 21, 1990, a second attempt by the parents was performed. They dug a hole under the northeast corner of the school building to a depth of about 15 feet. At this point, after finding no evidence of tunnels, some of these parents decided to hire professional help. Here are the key persons on this archaeological dig. Former FBI agent Ted Gunderson. He was also the boyfriend of one of the McMartin parents, Jackie McGowley. I can't guarantee that pronunciation. Jerry Hobbs, a professional gold miner and prospector. Don Michael, a geologist. And Dr. Gary Stickel, an archaeologist from UCLA. A month later, this team reported that they had discovered at least 2 tunnels that had been filled in. Several newspapers reported the story, and Gunderson had appeared on television stating that filled-in tunnels had been found. Dr. Stickel composed a report of his findings. A brief synopsis of the 186-page report is available online. Stickel listed 9 pre-established criteria that would have to be observed on the specific site, which was the area directly below the McMartin School building, in order to determine the existence of tunnels. I'll go over the conclusions of these 9 criteria. Stickel concluded in his report that all of the criteria had been met and that conclusive evidence of the tunnels had been confirmed by this excavation. The evidence presented by Stickel and his team is as follows, and this is a direct quote from Stickel's summary here. 1. An identified entrance. 2. The architecture was both linear and slightly curvilinear. 3. The architecture was large enough for an adult human passage. 4. There were characteristic scars indicating that it had been dug by hand. 5. The feature had a compacted dirt floor. 6. The tunnel was found not open. 7. The tunnel had been completely artificially filled in with fill that was distinguishable on the basis of color, texture, and compaction from the original soil deposit at the site. 8. The fill contained inclusions in the form of a large number of artifacts. And 9. The probabilistic dating of the tunnel can be estimated by recovered artifacts. End quote. These are the conclusions that correspond to the physical evidence discovered on site, observed, documented, and photographed that conform to the 9 criteria that were pre-established by the archaeologist. In addition to the tunnels, the crew also discovered a filled-in area containing numerous artifacts that suggested a room-sized underground cavity. In this area, they discovered plywood, tar paper, and roofing nails that may have served as a roof-like structure for the room. The room-like area and much of the tunnel area were filled with historical artifacts, including cans, bottles, metal pots, crockery, glass, etc. In order to demonstrate the proper time period for these tunnels to be used as evidence against the suspects in the McMartin case, Stickel's research had to show that the tunnels were accessible after the building was constructed in 1966 and that they had been used for human occupation as recently as 1983. The findings included the following evidence that is listed as showing that the tunnels were in operation after 1966. A plastic sandwich bag was discovered with Disney characters and a copyright date of 1982, as well as the words Disney, class of 1982/1983. The conclusion was that the tunnels were used as recently as 1983. There was a length of pipe that had stainless steel straps attached to it. The shininess and good condition of the straps made it unlikely that they could have been underground for 24 years. And there was a mailbox discovered that had the name and address of the former occupants of the house that was next to the lot of the school building. The house was torn down in 1972, and Stickel concludes that the box most probably dates to around that time. He also concluded that the ceiling of the tunnels were too thin to support any weight. So in order for the ceiling to remain intact, the concrete slab that was the floor of the building would had to have been in place before the tunnels were constructed. I have compiled this primarily from the executive summary of Archaeological Investigations of the McMartin Preschool Site, Manhattan Beach, California, by Dr. Gary Stickel, Ph.D. For supporting our documents, I used Dark Tunnels of McMartin by Dr. Roland C. Summit, Journal of Psychohistory, number 21, spring 1994. The YouTube videos, Exposing Satanism in U.S. Government by Ted Gunderson, parts 4 and 5, and McMartin Preschool Revisited by Alex Constantine. Okay, if you want to play along, you may read these articles and watch the videos before you go on to part 2 in order to form your own conclusion before investigating the information from authors who have concluded that Stickel's report is erroneous and his evidence is not sufficient to demonstrate that there were tunnels below the school building. The last article I listed, the one by Constantine, is terrible. I just included it because it contains a few things that are not mentioned in the others, but it is poorly written, hard to follow, and full of typical conspiracy nut hogwash. Links to the articles and the videos are where they always are. In the description of the video? No, they're in the Louvre, written on the back of the frame of the Mona Lisa. See you in part 2.